And now we're gonna polypaint the rest of the objects on this guy. Now we've got his skin done. And the first thing we're gonna do is do his teeth. Nothing really fancy going on here, and I don't spend a lot of time in his mouth. I don't even think I polypaint the back of his teeth, to be honest. But just really quickly, I took a toy plastic and that dark brown red color, and went ahead and filled the upper and lower teeth. And then just with RGB, I've got mRGB on, but really just painting with the RGB. Give his gums a little bit of color, and then I go in with browns and starting dark and moving to light. You know, as the plaque builds up around his gums, that's going to stay dark. And then I'll just go in and lighten the bottoms of his teeth where that gets a little more action. Here I with Z-Add on, I'm actually giving a little bit of surface detail to his teeth, just to kind of break that surface so they're not little chiclets. And then I go in with that lighter color and pull it up his tooth. And then even lighter, where he actually bites into stuff. It's probably a little bit cleaner. And then I go ahead and show the lower teeth. And I have the upper teeth still showing, so I can just pull colors from that. Again, like we talked about in part 1, you can just hover your cursor over any colored area on your canvas, and it'll actually, if you hit C, it'll pick up that color. And you can pick materials from your canvas as well, and from other subtools by just dragging where it says toy plastic, just dragging that material ball onto your screen. It'll select whatever material you have. There's his teeth. And just resetting these teeth back in there correctly. They got moved around previously. And then we're going to be painting this guy's armor. And just like on his skin, I go through a little trial and error process here too, kind of feeling out exactly what I want. So it'll probably get a little frustrating for me to watch, but leave it in here so you can see kind of what's going on in my brain as I'm kind of feeling things out. But by the time I get to the second and third armor piece, it gets to be really, really fast. And a really, really fast process. Here's a picture of an inside of a dumpster I took about 5 years ago. And I'm going to do a little levels. Hue and saturation eventually. There it is. Well, hue and saturation. So what I wanted to do was kind of like a dark rusted metal. And I do end up doing that. And then after kind of looking at him, I actually make it really dark rusted metal, just to kind of really nicely contrast with his skin. And then I go in and add a little bit of gold to kind of contrast with the red rust. So he's kind of got two-toned metal, which works a little bit better. So after doing those adjustments, I went ahead and copied another layer, and I put it as an overlay layer. Took another portion of that picture and overlaid it. I go with a stamp brush and kind of clean up any areas that are a little bit too different. Just kind of even it out just a tad. Again, this is just really rough work. And in fact, if you wanted to go into Zaplink and all over his armor, just Zaplink armor all over him or whatever, do it all in Photoshop, you can do that too. You can actually do all your texture work in Photoshop if you wanted to. I prefer to do it in ZBrush, but whatever is more comfortable for you, go for it. So I brought in under the texture menu. I went ahead and imported that dumpster texture. And I try a couple different things here. I spray that texture on first, freehand it on, and then I just end up just drag recting it all over. And I'm in a polypaint mode, it looks like, because I got my RGB intensity set up to 100, but it looks like it's multiplying it on there, or maybe darkening it. And this armor piece I did fill with that Metal 01 texture or material that you see down there. And I'm going to go into the material properties of that metal and just kind of play with it and see if I can get what I like. And what I did there was I went into the texture menu and then said, make an alpha out of this texture. And it made me a grayscale alpha that I can now use to drag rect noise just based on that texture that I had back onto them, just to kind of darken them up a little bit. So it's a really quick way to get a noisy alpha just based on the texture that you're using. And then with it that dark, just to kind of see what it's going to look like, or if it's going to work for me, I go in and kind of chew up the metal a little bit. If you look at worn armor, tends to wear around the edges, obviously, where it gets dragged and scraped and all that good stuff. And then eventually what I end up settling on is doing this kind of roughed up around the edges armor, and then in the cracks I just make it really dark. Kind of has a cartoony vibe to it. It's a little bit exaggerated, but I think it works okay for this guy. But again, we're still exploring. If you're on metal and you do want to kind of rough it up, like if you were to go to a rusty piece of metal and take a piece of steel wool to it, that's kind of that effect that's doing. If you take that freehand with the dotted alpha and just kind of rub it over your metal, it'll kind of have a steel wool effect if you've got dark metal. But here again, I'm just kind of experimenting with what I want. And if that was a freshly made kind of slash across his armor right there, it would maybe make sense to have it silvery in those parts. But and going back and looking at it, I do fix this eventually. It can't be that fresh if you had time to go back and add those little welds to keep it together. So I go ahead and go back in and make those cuts really dark. And that just kind of makes the metal contrast nicely. If you go in and really darken up those cracks and those slashes, and then really highlight those edges, you'll get some really nice contrast with your metal, your worn, dirty metal. And here I go in and I look at it, and it's not quite as dark as I wanted it to, so I go over it again with looks like a multiply with that texture, with a multiply brush mod, and drag rig that over. The polypaint mode, excuse me. Because I keep making that armor darker and darker, which, will eventually contrast nicely with the worn areas and with his skin as well. Here with the polypaint mode on lighten, probably I go in and kind of wear the armor down. I think eventually I don't end up using the polypaint modes on the later pieces of armor. I just drag rect what I want on, darken it up, and then I go in and just paint. I don't end up using the modes all that much, but I'm experimenting with them now. Again, I kept a trial and error on here, and hopefully I didn't bore you too much, but you can kind of see the process I went through. And here again with that steel wool method of freehand with that dotty alpha, you can kind of, you can rough up the edges, and then you can kind of rough them up even more with that steel wool. And then if there's any areas you really want to bring back, you can just keep rubbing that alpha over it with that light color. So I'll do this for a couple minutes, and then I'll take a step back and look at it, and if it's working, it's working. If it's not, I'll keep playing with it until it works for me. And here I go in and change up the lighting a little bit, just to see if everything's still kind of working under different kind of lighting. So I add a second light, which I throw behind and kind of add as an ugly, harsh backlight. It's not really pretty lighting, but I was going to want to make sure everything's going to work. A little bit more harsh lighting. I have a feeling I'll probably end up doing on this guy. And we are, I think, for the final marketing stuff, we are probably going to light this guy up a little bit more so than we did on the part 1, where it really wasn't all about lighting or anything, and this DVD really isn't either, but we'll present this guy a little bit more than we did on the severed head on part 1, which I think ended up just being just one light. And again, I'm playing with those material settings to kind of see how much sheen I can get off this. I'm going to use that alpha again, and I did like what the metal was doing in the lighter areas, but it was kind of washing out the darker areas. So what I keep doing is making that armor darker and darker. And then here, I go ahead and turn off colorize on all these objects. This method you could do, now that they have, you can turn off the paintbrushes, or you can go into the Subtool Master and, you know, in the Subtool Master section of this DVD, you can go in and see how you can do that just using Subtool Master really quickly. But that time I just went and turned them off manually. But I chose that dark color and kind of looked at them with all those pieces on just to kind of make sure that's the direction I wanted to go. And then I can go back in and rough them up some more. You know, because every time I go in and darken them up, I end up losing all that kind of wear detail. But it's real easy to get in there and do it again. And like I said, you know, by the second piece of armor, I've got the process down. And by the third piece of armor, it's just going through the motions. And it gets to be really fast. I think this whole guy polypainted only took a couple nights. You know, I do this stuff after work. So, you know, between 8 at night and midnight, probably, for a couple nights, polypainting this guy. About 6 hours. And that backlight, kind of playing with it. You know, again, just looking at the metal and making sure I'm getting the effect I want. The notice as I darken the metal, really kills the speck. But as I paint lighter, it really helps sell that object is metal. So I'm kind of slowly getting what I want out of the material and the poly paint. And blur this guy to make sure that, you know, it still kind of works. And kind of this fur lining I don't give an awful lot of love to, but just really quickly fill it with a dark color and then paint some brown on it and then kind of highlight the tips, and I think that's where I leave it at. In post, when I start doing the marketing stuff, I'll probably overlay an actual fur on top of this. And you could spend a lot of time, and I think ZBrush has some fiber rendering stuff that you could play with that I don't go into on either part 1 or part 2, but you know, just for the purposes of this, I wasn't going to spend a whole lot of time on his furry stuff. And again, you can go into the material settings and bump up the diffuse and the ambient, and you can play with those settings as well. High dynamic range and all that stuff. Again, just dark brown to the highlighted tips. I think I'd probably just call it good enough. Now his skin is a little blown out, and you know, I'll go in and correct that. But let me get to the pants, and I go ahead and fill it with just a dark brown because I know these are going to be leather, and I bring in a leather alpha that I think I just took off a cowhide from somewhere, and I use the drag rect. And again, you could, if you did have a leather you really liked, you could go into Zaplink, or just bring it in as a texture and just, you know, texture it up like that. In this case, I actually made just a leather alpha, and then I got to drag rect the leather colors that I wanted, and that was good enough for me. And like I did there, you can just build in a radial fade. You don't have to do that in Photoshop anymore. Making that vignette, that circular vignette, you can do that as a radial fade in your alpha menu. You can just bring in a square texture. And here I am just picking different leather colors and drag recting them on. And I'm trying to avoid that repeating texture look. So, you know, if you're just making tiny strokes, you know, just be mindful that, you know, you don't want a repeating leather look, and, you know, cover it up as much as possible. And here, just using the free hand, I'm going in and darkening kind of the leather accessory areas, the straps, and his the butt area. Probably a more cured, darker leather stuff. And if you really wanted to, you could actually dupe this material off and make it a little shinier on the darker parts. I didn't do that, but that'll help sell your character. Go for it. And this guy, I've already kind of brushed on that texture, and now I'm just kind of wearing him, make him a little more worn. Again, just really quickly go over the edges of your model, and you can wear them down, kind of pick and choose, and make sure it's obviously not just a straight, perfectly white line. You know, you're not highlighting edges. You're taking the worn areas and popping them out, and then you go back in with that freehand with that dotted alpha, and you can use that like steel wool and just kind of places you've already worn down on the edges. You can wear out little spots around those, and you can wear out other areas. That makes sense. And eventually I'll go back in with some gold color just to kind of break up how monotone these things kind of are right now. You know, they're just kind of all over rusty, and you wanna have contrast wherever you can kind of work it in, if at all possible. If everything is kind of the same, then it's kind of boring to your eye, you know, and your eye doesn't want to keep looking at it, you know. Same goes for, you know, when you're detailing or poly painting or anything, you know, if your character's super detailed all over, and your eye doesn't get a chance to rest, or if it's all the same material or all the same kind of detail, you know, it really ends up just, you know, no matter how detailed your character is, it'll just end up being boring looking, you know, your eye just kind of gets tired of looking at it real quick. But if there are different kinds of material and stuff, and different kinds of details, your eye, you know, a little more interesting for your eye to look at, and your eye can kind of travel over it and not get tired or bored, frankly. So here, go ahead and just fill that object with the darker color, and then grab the texture, and again, just drag rect with my RGB intensity at like 41%. And by this point, the armor starts getting pretty fast, you know. Dark color, drag rect at 40%. Use that brush texture, or that alpha that we made from the brush, from the texture, from the dumpster texture. Make an alpha out of it, and then just drag some darker colors onto those, and then just go in and beat it up, you know, and just pop those edges out. Here I introduce a little bit more red, a little dark red to it. Kind of push that rust feel. And then go in here just with, you know, freehand standard brush and just kind of wear those edges out. There might be some brushes in there that in R3 that respect edges, and you could maybe use those brushes. For me, it's, you know, it's just as easy to go in and wear out the edges just wherever you want it. And again, I'm still kind of experimenting with lighter cracks or darker cracks. And here I am doing the steel wool method. But I think eventually I end up making just all the cracks really dark and wearing out really light. That's just kind of a style. And by now you're probably bored with me texturing armor. But you know, if you're interested, this is how I got to this point. So taking the steel wool to it again. If you wanted to, you could actually introduce color with the surface noise function as well, which we talked about in part 1. And eventually it gets to the point where, you know, I make the dark armor, I go around all the edges and kind of wear them out, and then take the steel wool to it and kind of wear it out a little bit more, and then go in and paint the cracks really dark. Go in and put my gold portions of the armor, and then call it a day. It's to be a really fast process. And with the right kind of lighting and right kind of rendering, it can really pop. So, being a little sloppy here, but with the right treatment, you don't really notice it, I don't think. And from the right distance, you can choose where you want to really spend a lot of your time. And, I wanted to give Armor enough time to where it looked good, but I didn't want to spend all my time there and really make it beautiful for something that you may not ever see. So here's where I go in and darken all the cracks. And again, it does kind of give it it's a little heavy-handed. It starts looking a little cartoony, but it adds some nice contrast and really makes it pop. And I think it works for the character. So, if anybody was to call me out on it, I might go in and give it another once over. But just for the purposes of this, it's fine. You put those worn out edges right along the really dark slashes, and that contrast along those two lines really helps make it pop. And here's one that's already been painted, but you can kind of see where I started introducing the gold. Just kind of break it up, so it's not all just rusted red armor. There's areas, kind of pull out some of those shapes, make it a little bit more interesting to look at, so it's not all just a mush of red armor. And again, this is really just freehand with the hard dotted alpha. Kind of like your steel wool brushing on some gold onto these areas. And after I introduce the gold, I do go back in and wear out along the edges again, but with a slightly more golden white color, as opposed to just white. And again, it's not just monochromatic orange. You introduce a little bit of red in there. If you're really brave, you could put some really, really heavy red. Sometimes metal, when it gets the right lighting on it, can kind of bloom in a really nice. The gold metal can kind of bloom in a really nice, really noticeable red way. I didn't really do that here, but something to keep in mind. And just a little bit of red tones and stuff, but here I've got all his leather straps showing, and they are different subtools, so you're going to see them all change color because they don't have colorize turned on as I work on each individual strap. But I do have the pants showing, so I can just pull from the color that's already existing. So does two things. Number one, it saves me some time, and it makes it look like it's all from the same world. He doesn't have 40 different kinds of leather on him. He all took this leather off the same cow. So it's kind of built in. I'm adding some with just mRGB selected. I'm coloring in the metal parts on his straps, and I don't show all this. You probably don't want to sit through me coloring all these leather straps one by one, but just the basic idea. Just like the pants, make it dark brown, drag your leather alpha over them. Any metal parts, treat them with the metal the metal material and metal color. And then, just to make it a little more interesting, I do darken the outside edges of the straps. And of course buckles will be metal and all that stuff, but fast, easy process. Doesn't take too long. And again, just sampling from the pants over and over again over all of his pieces so that they're all uniform. And it's a fast way to get color. Make sure it all ends up looking the same.